There were two men that grew up in the 1700s in Oxford University, and they went by the names of George Whitefield and John Wesley. And these two men were connected not only because of their time in which they grew up and the college that they went to, but they were both very religious men and were called to the ministry. And George Whitefield had an incredible, powerful ministry. He's known as one of the great preachers of all time. He'd preached to as many as 60,000 people at one time, reports said, which back in the 1700s, that's pretty incredible. That's pretty incredible today, but back then, before things like microphones and PowerPoints, that's even more impressive. And he was known as probably America's first celebrity. About 80,000% of all the colonists knew his name. He was truly a household name, the first household name. Literally everyone in America in the 1700s knew who George Whitefield was. He had this awesome, amazing ministry. He could deliver fiery, emphatic, powerful, anointed sermons and words from God. And there's this other man, John Wesley, who was preaching at the same time. He wasn't nearly as dynamic a preacher as Whitefield was. He would preach to a couple hundred if Whitefield was preaching to a couple thousand, or he'd preach to 4,000 or 5,000 when Whitefield was preaching to 30 and 40 and 50,000. He was still a great man of God, but he didn't have that same dynamic ministry. Yet, if you were to look at the history of the church, especially the Methodist Church, you'd find that although Whitefield was an incredible preacher, a prolific, dynamic preacher, he didn't have the same following, the same staying power of his ministry that Wesley did. What I mean by that is Wesley went and started establishing a structure. He started home groups. He started small fellowship groups. He started Bible studies. And while he wasn't preaching to as many people, the Methodist Church traces their roots back to Wesley today, while no one really traces their roots back to Whitefield today. Whitefield's still known as a great preacher, but Wesley's ministry survived a whole lot longer because he built a structure that could contain the revival that God was giving him. He wasn't just standing up, preaching a great sermon, and then going on to the next town and preaching a great sermon and not really ever knowing what would go on after he left the town. But Wesley was building something. He was building something that could sustain and grow. There's a quote from the book God's Generals, written by Robert Liardon, and that says, "The vast network of Methodist societies established by the Wesley brothers," John Wesley had a brother named Charles, "brought about desperately needed assurances of God's mercy and love in this time of uncertainty, economic hardship, and short life expectancy. These home groups," what people call cell groups today, "orchestrated by the Wesleys, provided ongoing instruction, prayer, accountability, and the necessary discipleship and fellowship that are the foundation of spiritual growth. More importantly, John and Charles Wesley brought the message of free grace directly to the masses." Now, we would disagree with the Wesleys a little bit on doctrine, but I think it's really cool when you compare those two ministries, that Wesley's ministry, although it wasn't as prolific as Whitefield's, it led to the Methodists, which there's millions of Methodists still in that movement today. And actually, the holiness movement, which is where a lot of the people who received the Holy Ghost at Azusa Street, a lot of those people came out of the holiness movement, which came out of the Methodist Church. So in a way, they're connected to us today. But as we look at our church structure that God has given us based on what he's shown in the Bible and to the apostles, I want you to keep that in mind, that we can have great moves of God, we can have awesome moves of God, but if there's not a foundation and a structure and something in place to hold and keep and retain that harvest, it could easily slip through our fingers, and we could see so many people come in and receive the Holy Ghost and become a part of the church for a little while, but there's not enough for them to get plugged into. There's not enough for them, enough people for them to connect with. If that happens, they could easily slip right back out. And so we want to have something that's apostolic and biblical and true, but also something that will help people as they come to God to be able to plug in and be a part of what God is doing. So as we go through these 5 lessons, the first lesson, each lesson we're going to kind of tackle a problem, if you will. So to attack this from this angle, the problem that we want to tackle today is one building per autonomous church, which means a church that has a pastor and stands on its own. It's not a daughter work or connected to another church. One building per one autonomous church limits growth potential. What do I mean by that? If a whole bunch of people came in on next Sunday and got the Holy Ghost and got baptized in Jesus' name, we could pack them into these pews, and it would be awesome. And I don't know how much this building seats, maybe 150, or maybe we could pack in 200. I don't know. But eventually, there comes a point where this building can only contain so many people, right? You know, we can only do so much before the fire marshal comes and shuts us down, or people stop coming because they don't want to be, sitting on people's laps or something. So if you've got one building per one church, you're only going to be able to have so much growth and so much revival. So of course, what do people do? Well, what the answer often is to build a bigger building, or maybe you could go to have multiple services. You could have a service in the morning, a service at night, or another option might be you could start a daughter work and plant another church. And those all have their place, and God can certainly use all of those avenues of growth. But there's a couple problems. Brother Wright, who's our pastor's pastor, or bishop's bishop, I guess you could say, from Antioch, tells the story of how his church was experiencing awesome growth, and they didn't have one building. They were meeting in several different places, and at one point they had 200 Bible studies going on. And then they decided, we need to build a building so that we can really start having church. We're going to build this beautiful building, and they started this building project, and by the time they got to the end of the building project, their whole church had 2 Bible studies going. So they went from 200 to 2, and it wasn't that people didn't care anymore. It's just it took so much energy and effort to build another, to build a big building that could house all the people that they wanted to. He realized at the end, he stepped back and said, wow, we were really reaching the lost before, and since then our focus has turned a little bit to building a building. Now, it's not that building buildings is wrong. We have a building, our church, we built this here, and I'm thankful for it. It's awesome. It's served us well, but there's a limit to that method of growth, to just let's build another bigger building, let's knock out the walls and go a little bit more. That takes a lot of time and money and energy. And so we're going to look today at other ways to grow and to expand and to see the church grow as we saw in the New Testament. Another quick point, David built a temple for the Lord, but if you read in 2 Samuel chapter 7, verse 7, David came to God and said, I want to build this temple for you. And God ended up endorsing the idea. But before he did that, he said, spake I a word with any of the tribes of Israel, whom I commanded to feed my people Israel, saying, why build ye not me a house of cedar? And what God was saying is, David, you can build this house for me, but don't think that I've come to you asking you to build me a house. And so it's interesting. I'm not going to make a big doctrine or statement out of it, but it's interesting that it was David's desire to build God a house, and God said, I've dwelt with you in tents while you traveled around. I haven't asked you to build me a house. And then another final point to the building idea of growth is, if you look back again, going into church history, in 313 A.D., a man named Constantine was getting involved. He was a Roman emperor, and he was getting involved in the church. And we know that in 325 he held the Council of Nicaea, which is where the Trinitarian doctrine really started to grow and become accepted. But in 313, about 10 years earlier, he was trying to merge paganism and Christianity. And the problem is, the pagans in the Roman Empire didn't really want to be associated with as Christians, but Constantine was making it just kind of universal. That's our religion. And so in order to reconcile these two, he said, well, you have these beautiful pagan temples. Let's turn these into churches or cathedrals, and then it will be more acceptable for the pagans to go. They can still go to what used to be their temples, and we'll call them cathedrals. And so he issued what's known as Constantine's Cathedral Edict in 313. And that really is the first time in church history we see that people were focused on building, or that Christians were focused on building beautiful churches and cathedrals. Up to that point, 300 years almost since Christ walked the earth, they hadn't worried about how big the buildings were going to be or how beautiful they're going to be. So I'm not saying that building buildings is a bad idea, or that planning daughter works, or having multiple services. All those things have their place and God can use them. But we want to look at what God, the structure that God has given us and the examples that we take that from. So let's look at a biblical answer. We're going to call this the right hand of God. The right hand of God. So if you hold up your hand, it's got 4 fingers and a thumb and a palm. Hopefully, maybe you're missing a finger, but that's what most people's hands look like. So we've got these 5 elements of the hand, the 4 fingers and a thumb. And so we're going to equate those to 5 different roles or things, I guess, that happen in a church and that God has given us. Before I go into that, the right hand, it maybe is a weird term to use, the right hand of God, but if you look in the scriptures, Psalms talks about the saving strength of God's hand, and other verses talk about God bringing the Hebrews out of Egypt with a mighty hand. The New Testament talks about the right hand of fellowship. Job talks about being taught by the hand of God. So we see that typology or that terminology of God's right hand. We know it's authority. We know a hand reaches for someone, a hand helps, a hand holds. A hand has a lot of function. A hand does stuff. Our hands are useful and active and accomplishing things and very important to your body. So these 5 elements are Bible studies, home groups, congregations, the corporate body, and the oversight ministry, which we'll probably just call bishop. So I'm going to use the analogy of each finger as one of these 4, and then the 5th one will be the 5th one is the thumb, which is the oversight. So bear with me a little bit through this analogy, but I think it actually is kind of cool as we go through it. So the first finger is the small finger. Everyone's got a pinky finger. It's your weakest finger. It's if your hand's like this, it's the lowest. It's on the bottom. And so I'm going to equate the pinky finger or the small finger to Bible studies. Bible studies are at the core and the foundation of what we do, just as the foundation's at the bottom. So if you will, the Bible studies are, as the fingers, the weakest, the lowest, if you will. The Bible studies are not big dynamic services. We know that. I'm talking about sitting at someone's kitchen table with a 12-week chart, search for truth or something, and smelling their house that kind of smells like cigarette smoke, and having a TV on the back, on in the background with something terrible playing, like really in the trenches, out in the lost, reaching people. That's at the core of what we do. That's at the foundation of what we do. Home Bible studies. I really believe in home Bible studies because I see them in the book of Acts, Acts chapter 8. Philip was translated, and he's starts up this conversation with the Ethiopian eunuch. And the Ethiopian eunuch is reading these scriptures, and he says, I won't read the whole text, but he says, how can I understand it? I think Philip asks him, do you understand what you're reading? And the eunuch says, well, how can I unless someone explains them to me? And so Philip just starts explaining to him what he's reading. And Philip starts teaching him a Bible study, one-on-one. And the man gets baptized. And we see that in other examples throughout the scripture. So home Bible studies are the will of God, and they're pleasing to God. And that is so vital to what we do and the vision that God has given us here at Acts 2. I know many of our prayer groups, which are 10 or 12 people meeting in a living room, worshiping and singing and praying, many of those have started as just simple Bible studies, teaching your neighbor, teaching your coworker. I believe in Bible studies because I've had the opportunity to minister to a couple young men in our youth group. And over the past several months, 3 of them have gotten baptized. And what was cool is I had an opportunity to preach here on Sunday morning at Acts 2, and I preached about baptism. And I was hoping they would be reached and they would be drawn and they'd want to come up and get baptized. And I believe it helped and taught and encouraged them and did that stuff, but they didn't get baptized. And I taught specifically in youth group on Friday nights. I taught on baptism, on the importance of being baptized in Jesus' name and what it meant and what it did and the scriptures and all these analogies and stories and examples. And I think it helped them, and that was good, that was pleasing to God. But it was when I was sitting at a table at Dunkin' Donuts with them, and we were eating munchkins and drinking, coladas or coffee or whatever, and we had the One Lord, One Faith pamphlet that Brother Hanson's written, and when I sat there with them and really tried to explain and ask questions and talk one-on-one, or, there's a group of them, it was after that, it was at the end of that session that we started to make plans, and they said, yeah, let's talk to Mom, and we'll set up a date where the family can come and can get baptized. So I believe in Bible studies because I've seen that there's certain things that you will accomplish in a Bible study that you might just not be able to accomplish anywhere else. So Bible studies are huge. They're so important. They're so foundational to what we do, to what we want to do when we're reaching the lost. The second one is home groups, or we call these here prayer groups, or Hop and See, Hour of Prayer and Care, HOP and C, Hour of Prayer and Care. This is the next finger, so if I use my left hand now, there's a ring on that finger. And that's because I'm married, so that signifies I have a relationship with my wife. I'm committed to her. That's what that ring signifies. So prayer groups or home groups are the elements of relationship, the ministry of relationship and nurturing. Again, when you're sitting in a living room with 7 or 8 people, and you're praying and you're sharing stories or prayer requests or testimonies or songs or whatever it is, there's something that happens in that group that just doesn't happen between the preacher up here preaching on Sunday morning and people in the pews, even with altar calls and greeting times and stuff like that. There's something about prayer groups that we have found here at Acts 2 that are just amazing and just can't be really replaced by anything else. I think if you look at Jesus, the first thing he did was he started a group of 12. And that's about our cap of what our typical prayer groups is they'll have about up to 12 people, and then maybe if it grows more than that, we'll multiply it into 2 groups. There's another story in Acts where Paul came to this lady named Lydia, and it was just her and a couple believers that were having meetings and praying and just having a little time of seeking after God. And that was in Philippi, and a church got planted in Philippi that Paul would later write the book of Philippians to. That was just a little group, just a little house group, a little prayer group, a little home group. You see, you read throughout the book of Acts, there's example and reference after reference. I won't read them all, but again and again of people, teaching house to house, going house to house, and God adding to the church every day, house to house. And so we see that apostolic example, that it wasn't just Jesus preaching to the thousands. It wasn't just Peter standing up on the day of Pentecost. But it also wasn't just Philip ministering one-on-one. There were small groups. There were small houses people would meet in, and that was extremely important. So we believe that God is asking us to operate in that same vein and be used in that same ministry. And that's where prayer groups happen normally here at Acts 2 on Tuesdays or Wednesdays or Thursdays, sometime during the midweek in people's houses. The next one is the middle finger. So, of course, this is a dangerous one to point out to you, so I won't stick it out for you. But it's the longest finger. It's probably the strongest. It reaches the furthest. It's the longest. And so I'm going to equate the middle finger in this right hand of God, this plan, this analogy God's given. I'm going to equate that to having congregations. So what I mean by that is, we'll get into this a little bit more in later lessons, but while we have one service on Sunday morning currently at this time, there's other churches that have been planted out of this church, meeting in West Hartford and Worcester, and those have gone on to be autonomous churches. But there's also a vision and promises that God has given us of affecting many towns around this town. So our vision, our goal here isn't just to have as many people at Thompson as we can on Sunday morning, and if we can just get that Sunday morning attendance up really high, well, that really means we're doing something. It could be at some point, and we've even, I think, done this before in the past, have multiple services going on in other towns. I remember we've had services in Southbridge and in Putnam and some of these surrounding towns, and it could very well be, and I believe it will be, as God grows our prayer groups and grows our reach and our influence, that we may not be able to fit everyone here on Sunday. And maybe there's 50 people in Southbridge that would be normally traveling here, but now we need to have another facility there, so it's local for those people, and we don't have room here. And then maybe there's 30 people coming from Willimantic. There could be another congregation there, or any town or whatever opportunity, however God opens that up, however those doors open. But the idea is that God's given this vision of multiple congregations that are able to reach. You guys know we've got people coming from Springfield and Winchendon and down in Manchester and Colchester and all these other places that are 30, 40, 50, 60 minutes away, traveling to come to Acts 2. And I think that's awesome and that's pleasing to God. But it also might just be that God wants to expand and grow, not just by us tearing this building down and building one that can seat 100 more people, and 10 or 15 years later maybe another expansion, but there could be multiple congregations meeting at the same time. Still one body, but multiple congregations, multiple tentacles reaching into different areas. And why would that be the vision? And that could mean other things too. That could mean things like prison ministries or nursing home ministries potentially. Obviously they, you can't bring prison ministry to church. You have to go to them, right? So it's the same idea with congregations. And we see in the New Testament there were house churches where, and sometimes maybe that referred to something similar to like a prayer group, but there were also times where I think like with Cornelius, it's probable from what I've read that he probably had several or at least multiple generations, maybe as many grandkids or even great-grandkids and nephews and nieces and all this in his house, not just a little, apartment, but a house. And so there could have been 100 or more people that lived in that house and servants and all this. And they would oftentimes build those houses with an open courtroom in the middle. And so courtyard in the middle. And so 100 or more people might be able to fit into that open courtyard, and you could have a service there, and that really would be like what you'd think of a second congregation. Maybe there's 75 people over here. So in these churches in the New Testament, Ephesus and Thessalonian, all these different places, it seems probable, based on what scholars have researched, that they weren't all going to some great amphitheater and 12,000 people were meeting there, but there was 100 people here and 100 people in this house and 200 people here in the synagogue and 100, 300 people in the field over there and people in this house. And so we see this in the New Testament, and obviously I'm thankful for our growth in technology and comfort and having controlled, climate and comfortable places to meet and we're not trying to just go back to the brush arbor days just to be, really authentic or something. That's not what we're trying to do, but what we're trying to do is reach people. We're trying to go out and make it easier for people to attend and be in the presence of God. I think of the word friction, and that's a word that is used a little bit in technology today, where some of these companies that have, or like social media websites like Facebook or YouTube or something like that, one of their big goals is to reduce friction. Friction means it's, you go to do something and it's tough. It's, you got to log in 3 different times and get a confirmation email and all that. Well, they want to get rid of as much of that, because the less friction there is, the more and more time people will spend. For example, on YouTube, if you use that recently, it's been a couple years now, but you get done watching a video, and it used to be it would just stop, and you could pick another video to watch. Now, another video that they think you're interested in will automatically start playing for you in like 3 seconds. And that's very nice of them, but it's also meant to just kind of suck you in. You don't have to. It's actually easier to watch another video than it is to stop. It takes more effort to stop doing it than to just continue doing it, and there's a strategy to that. So part of what multiple congregations could do is reduce that friction. It's great that there's people that are dedicated to drive an hour to church, but I think that the commission, I know the commission is to go into the world. And so part of having congregations and then prayer groups around those and then Bible studies around those is we want to do everything we can to go out into the world and to reduce that friction, and wherever people are, be all things to all people. We want to do what we can to reach them. In next, the index finger, or the pointer finger, we might call it, is the corporate body, or also you could think of as the leadership and maybe some of the senior ministry. The pointer finger, right, it points the direction. Hey, we're going that way. And so a very important part is all the ministry that goes on, the training that goes on, the leadership that goes on, us coming together. Where are we going? Even if there were 5 different locations that we were meeting in on Sunday morning, it'd still be one body with a unified mission and goal and a unified faith and belief. And so it's important that even though there could be hundreds of Bible studies and prayer groups and congregations and preaching points and all these things, there's one unified corporate body. And we do that by buying into the vision and submitting to the leadership and the direction that God has given us. And finally, the thumb is, not to pick on my bishop, but the thumb is the odd one here, right? And so the thumb is offset from the fingers, or opposite of the fingers. But what it can do is kind of cool, is your thumb can touch each one of these other fingers very easily. Whereas, if you try to do that with your fingers, they can't touch other fingers nearly as naturally, and you certainly can't grasp things and pick up things as well. And so we'll look at this idea of overseer and where that word comes from, but to give you a hint, basically that's what bishop means, is overseer. And so God, we're not just cowboys out there doing whatever, starting churches and planting things and splitting off and doing this, that, and the other, but there is direction that's coming. There's accountability, there's oversight, and that comes through the bishop and his ministry that he sets up to have different points of accountability, whether it's through him or through an elder or whatnot. And it's able to go into a Bible study, able to go and touch a prayer group, able to minister to congregations if they need it, and of course give the leadership to the corporate body. And so that's the five, not fivefold ministry, but the 5 appendages, the 5 the pieces, elements of the right hand of God that we're going to look at today. And so to close, I'll just talk about the church in Pakistan, which I came across this from Brother Wright, passed this along, and this is actually several years out of date now, so I assume it's much bigger, but it's kind of cool because so we've looked at how I've just quickly referenced some examples in the New Testament that align with what we're doing here and that we've drawn from to set this up. And then I've seen some things personally, but on a large scale, what's pretty cool in Pakistan, they had, about 10 years ago, they had 105,000 constituents, which is amazing for a country that's predominantly Muslim and not really open to Christianity. Yet they only had 222 ministers, 105,000 people attending church in different settings, 220 ministers, 600 churches, 1,300 preaching points. And they define churches, it could be as few as 5 people, but you have to have at least 5 people that are saved, that are meeting in a group, and they'll call that a church. And so if you were to do the division or whatever and work the math out, every one minister in the country of Pakistan would have about 10 churches or preaching points. So for every minister, there's at least 10 churches or preaching points and about 500 constituents. And how they do that is not by everyone going off on their own and doing different things and just kind of doing what seems good to them. But there's a certain oversight, there's a certain mission and goal, and they use a lot of these concepts and these ideas where they're a little bit strange to us in North America, because to be honest with you, we normally think of, you have a pastor, and depending on the size of the church, you might have an assistant pastor, or maybe a couple assistant pastors, or an executive pastor, or a administrative pastor, and a youth pastor, and a worship pastor, and lots of pastors. And for us, then once that grows too large, or someone gets a call to home missions or something, they go and they start a church and they dig out Bible studies and grow a church, and they're on their own and travel around and get sponsorships from other churches, and hopefully it grows. Eventually they can become an autonomous church, and then that will grow and grow and grow, and then eventually someone from that church will get the call and they'll go start a church, and they'll start with 3 people and not be able to pay their bills and have all these struggles. And certainly I don't say that to diminish what home missions or any of these great men of God that have started churches have done. My grandfather was a church planter. But if you look at how it was set up in the New Testament, and how some of the foreign missions fields have done such a good job of having leadership and then just sending people out, and maybe they're very small meeting points. It could be 13 people in a hut over in this town that you got to go to, but that's a church. And there could be Bible studies starting out of that, and there could be other things starting out of that, and maybe one minister is going out to 6 different congregations, not saying, oh wait, we can't do that, we need a pastor, an assistant pastor, and all this stuff. And so God has given us a structure that will house and hold the revival that God has given us. And my final little analogy before we close is that I recently got married, and as I was getting ready for our wedding, I had to get our apartment ready. And I was thinking about it while I was doing that, as I was doing different things. We were getting furniture. We were doing a little, planning where things would go. And Diana was, picking out the right shades and the right comforter and all this different stuff that would match and look good. We were getting our house ready, our home ready. And I thought about it as I was in my apartment, and I was there and for a little while, and I was happy basically with it being pretty barren. I mean, I wouldn't have been for a really long time, but it wasn't that nice. But I wanted to make it nicer than it was. Even if I was happy, I wanted her to be happy when she moved in. I wanted to have furniture and things that you need. And so I thought about that. I'm getting my house ready because I know that my family's going to grow. My family right now is me, one person, but it's about to double, and there's going to be 2 of us. And so my home, my apartment, my house has got to be ready. And so sometimes it may seem strange because maybe our church, isn't even close to full, or it's like, why do we really need another prayer group, or why do I, need to do this? Why should we be wondering about where we're going to be planting another church? We barely have enough right now. But God gives us a structure. I had to have a house first. I had to have something in place first before someone else could come and could be a part of it, and that could be a healthy, permanent thing. And so I think that God, just as God created the body first and then he breathed into it, God's given us a structure, and God is getting us ready, and God is raising up leaders and teaching people to be home Bible study teachers and prayer group leaders and leaders of congregations and leaders of churches and evangelists and teachers and pastors and prophets and apostles and all these different things, so that as the structure grows, as the foundation grows, as the house gets ready, then there can be a mighty, mighty move of God, and we'll be ready to do something with it. Amen. So thank you so much, and